guys, this is Tom with VSE, and we have a new product relaunch for the L5P GM Duramax diesels. This is our L5P fuel system saver. This looks something similar to what you may have seen on the market with a little fix at the end of this. So we have fuel that comes through a fuel and water separator, and then it goes to a post filter. But before I explain this in extreme detail, I want to cover the way the factory L5P fuel system works. So the factory L5P uses, which I'm sure you guys have all seen, this stock fuel filter canister with a water and fuel separator, a conductivity probe, and a fuel system heater, which is this top thing here. And inside this, if you've taken the bottom of one of these guys off, you'll see this. And this is the stock GM cartridge filter. And this cartridge filter is a water and fuel separator. So it has a sock in here to minimize the amount of water intrusion that these things get into the fuel system. And its filters down to 5 micron level. And these are pretty readily available. And the way that this thing works is that cartridge sits down in here, and this water and fuel filter, this probe sits down in here, and it measures how much water and fuel there is by, if you could zoom in here, by sending voltage down this wire and across these two little conductivity probes here. And since diesel fuel's not conductive, or the conductivity with diesel fuel is really low, and water is extremely conductive, as water sits down inside this fuel filter bowl, the conductivity probe will start to allow current and voltage to flow from one end of the wire to the other, and the ECM measures the conductivity and the voltage. So if the fuel system's in really good shape, there's no water in it, the ECM and the fuel pump driver control module, which we'll explain here in a second, it'll show that there's 0 volts. And as the conductivity goes up in the fuel, or the water in the fuel level goes up, the ECM will start seeing higher voltage. And 3.2 volts is where the check engine light and the water and fuel light will come in on the L5P ECM and alert the driver that there's bad or contaminated fuel. So we know a lot about the way that thing works, and what we see in a lot of these trucks, and this is an L5P HP4 pump, so this would be like the new version of the CP3, so this is specific just to the L5P. So you can see a lot of the brown contamination in here from water intrusion or water emulsification in diesel systems. And this is a rail out of an L5P, one of the fuel rails. This would be the driver's side rail, and this is fuel pressure regulator number 2. And you can see the contamination just from how dark and brown this is, just rust and stuff. So this is a fuel system that we disassembled upon inspection, and this system's full of, just rust and debris, pretty low mileage truck. So we see this a lot. We're predominantly engineers and calibrators here, so we tune a ton of L5Ps, a ton of them in this country. And we started to see this over time, and we decided to make a system to fix it. Now, I understand that there is a system out there already that basically takes and replaces the factory fuel system filter with and we made one just to make one, but basically a replacement for the factory filter. So this is our version of it, which we would never sell. So this guy drops in here, and this is kind of what's on the market currently. So the conductivity probe sits in here, and then this guy sits right down into bolted into the frame, and then this filter or a filter of your choosing would screw down into that. We understand that this is for sale, but the reason that we went to this system is right here. So if you take this conductivity probe and it sits down inside this bowl, and it looks about like this. So you can see how far down into this bowl this sits. It almost sits right down at the bottom of the filter. And since water is quite a bit heavier specific density wise than fuel, the water tends to sit on the bottom of the filter. So this probe would pick up water really quick. If I were to have just replaced that with something like this, and this probe were to sit in here, so would sit down in there like this, you can see that this probe would have 3, 4, or 5 inches of water sitting down below the probe before this sensor even has an opportunity to pick up the water intrusion in the diesel fuel. So that is a problem. So you basically replace something that works okay. Again, this is the same GM part number that's used in the Chevy Cruze with a filter that's readily available. But you've taken away the sensor's ability to measure water and diesel very easily. We don't like that. We think that to be a problem. So we made this, and we'll go over the way the fuel system actually works here. We have it taped up on one of our CNC machines, so you can see that everything that's in yellow is all the low pressure side. So we would call that the lift pump pressure side of this system. So we got diesel fuel that sits in this tank, and the lift pump sits down on the diesel volume, and it has a certain level of net positive suction head that sits over the top of the bottom of the fuel pump at all times. Fuel is pressurized out of the lift pump, comes into the inlet of this GM factory filter and water separator, and the fuel pump driver module that sits over here, and this is what sits above the spare tank on the L5P, the spare tire. This guy is sitting here constantly measuring the amount of water and fuel, and it's also turning the heater on so it can warm the diesel fuel up. So the lift pump discharge pressure pressurizes the factory fuel filter. It comes up here to the fuel pressure sensor. So unlike a replacement lift pump like a fast pump or an air dog, the lift pump on an L5P, which is good to like 230 liters per hour of fuel, which is good to at least 850 horsepower that we've measured on our load-bearing dyno. The lift pump in an L5P is pressure dependent, meaning that this fuel pump driver module that sits over here, it's constantly trying to maintain between 55 and 62 PSIG, and then if the truck's in regeneration mode, like DPF regen, it'll speed the pump up, so it's a variable drive, it'll speed the pump up to maintain 75 PSIG for a short period of time. So unlike a fast fuel system or otherwise, they're just volume dependent, meaning that they're set at a certain pressure and then they're just whatever gallon per hour that they're rated at, they continuously discharge fuel flow. So again, it comes down here to the 9th injector, that's item number 3. Again, it sees 60 PSIG, and then it comes down to the inlet of the HP4, that's the high pressure fuel pump. And then from there, the HP4 has a regulator, it's called fuel pressure regulator number 1, internal to the pump, and it pressurizes fuel system pressure from 0 PSIG up to 31,999 PSIG, which happens to be the end of the sensor range. And then it sends flow up to the inlet of the driver's side fuel rail and then to the passenger side fuel rail in similar fashion to what would have occurred in the LML. And then fuel pressure regulator number 2, number 8, discharges excess fuel pressure into the back into the HP4, which eventually gets returned into the back through a fuel cooler into the pump. And then from there, obviously it goes to all 8 injectors. All 8 injectors have return, which is regulated again back into the pump. So what we end up seeing in this fuel system is a lift pump that filters fuel moderately well, that's pressure dependent. But the downside is this fuel filter is a part number that came off of the Chevy 1.8 liter Cruze, so it's extremely small. So we wanted to cover the way that the fuel system works. Again, it works really well. It just needs a little bit better help from the fuel filter system itself. So back to this, what we decided to do is filter the fuel at a pre-filter style. So if fuel comes in here at, again, 60 pounds regulated pressure by a lift pump that is far advanced, again, a 3-phase brushless motor, an extremely advanced lift pump. So fuel flow comes into here, this conductivity probe and heater, and the heater is this set of pads underneath here. This heater sits down inside this guy, and this is going to filter with our Donaldson part number. It's a P551329, which is readily available and extremely cheap, and we'll be selling on our website, and you can get those filters anywhere. It'll filter this down at 13 microns. So this is going to catch like the large debris, all the crap that comes through the fuel system, and then it's also going to separate the water at the exact same amount of level that the factory fuel filter was designed to sense water at. And then it's going to send the fuel up through the outlet of this filter, and it's going to discharge it into the inlet of this filter. And this filter is going to filter down to 3 microns. And this part number is P551313. And this is going to be our post filter. So now we have 2 filters to filter out water and fuel, and then filter out all the debris that we see destroy these fuel systems. And then obviously this will be sent down to the inlet of the HP4, and then it'll be a lot cleaner fuel. So we have a patented design that allows us to cross flow fuel inside this block to make sure that it gets to the inlet of the HP4 really well. And we also did tons and tons and tons of testing on this, which we'll show, but we put differential pressure taps across here to make sure that this filter head assembly flows at least as good, if not better, than the factory assembly. We did this up to 650 real horsepower. The pump speed was a little lower, 200 RPM lower at 650 horsepower than what we found on the factory filter head. And again, it's not because we're filtering through a much tighter micron filter here. It's because this is all port matched internally to flow fuel at a much higher volume than the factory. And we're also not trying to cram that much fuel delivery through such a small filter. So that'll take care of the fuel filtration side. So there is some concerns about gelling that some people have brought up. Would this gel up because maybe they've been used to a fast fuel system sitting there? Maybe there's been an issue with an air dog or something in the past. The heater arrangement in a L5P is extremely intricate and it works very well. This guy is only going to have as much fuel flowing through this block as the engine requires to idle, plus whatever the 9th injector needs to use for DPF regeneration, plus injector return back. Since this is a pressure dependent system and not volume dependent, we're not going to send 165 gallons per hour through this guy. We're only going to send what the engine requires for fuel, again, plus 9th injector, plus injector leak back. So we can actually heat the fuel up at a much quicker level to prevent any fuel filters from gelling up. So if fuel go across this, it'll heat it pretty quick. We won't have these things gel up because of the low amount of volume going through here. And then the L5P will be perfectly satisfied with the fact that we're heating the fuel at the filter and internal to the filter. What we've seen during testing in the winter when it's super cold, like negative 20 degrees here in Nebraska, we've seen fuel temperature go from about -5, -10 degrees Fahrenheit, again with the truck sitting outside, to within 10 minutes, about 72 degree fuel temp. The sensor sits about 6 feet downstream of this, so that's what we're seeing pretty quickly. So we just don't really have a lot of concerns over gelling this up. Something else that's probably pretty important to cover is the fact that you can drain this really well, and over putting a lift pump on the truck, which an aftermarket lift pump would require you to terminate the fact that the ECM could see water, and I have to delete 3 P codes as a result of the aftermarket lift pumps running at a much lower pressure than L5P. This system will continue to monitor for water and fuel and report back to the ECM to give the user a check engine light to know that there's actually water in the fuel to prevent destruction like this with HP4s. So in the large number of L5Ps we've tuned, we've seen a lot of damage. Again, HP4, good pump, really sensitive to water. The fuel pressure regulator, really sensitive to water. The injectors, they seem to survive it pretty well, but again, the system, especially if it's been sitting for a while, it tends to rust and degrade pretty quickly. So again, we have these for the 17 all the way up to 2022 Duramax. These things are plug and play, so 17 and 19, you literally, these are 1/2 inch fittings that are port matched. You literally quick connect the factory fittings on this, bolt this guy in place, drop your conductivity sensor right down in there, run the screws that we supply, new O-rings for this, drop it right in place. It takes you about 30 minutes to install. On the 2020s, you remove the factory bracket, bolt our bracket in place, bolt this in place, and then connect the lines, and then drop the conductivity probe in here, connect it up, and then turn the key on, which will pressurize the lift pump to purge all the water out of here, and you're good to go. And then you can run filters, left and right. You'll be supplied in the kit with 2 filters. You can also buy them as packages on our website, by the case or single if you want them. These filters will, because we're using a factory style arrangement of fuel filtration, your dash is still going to tell you when it's required to change the fuel filter. Like every 15,000 miles, it's also going to tell you if you got water in the fuel. We'd recommend every 15,000 miles, just change both these sets. If you get water in the fuel or the light turns on, obviously we have an issue. You should be checking for and draining this water in the water filter. And then literally the system's pretty plug and play. We designed it to be as such. Again, this isn't to dig at what's out there on the market. This is not a better solution. We wanted to offer something much, much better, and I think that we did it there. So that's all I got. If you guys have any questions, you can call us at 1-833-789-7700. You can hit sales or you can hit tech. If you're a dealer, hit the dealer extension line. You can also message us on Instagram, Facebook, and we're always pretty responsive via email. And then as far as purchasing goes, we'll have these ready for probably, I'd say like in a week. And then you can just purchase away. That's all we got. Thanks.